The stark rules of the frontier were clear. Blood called to blood, and cultures stood apart. Yet in the heart of a merciless desert, a love ignited that defied every boundary, etching itself into the very dust of the land. They said it couldn't exist, that it shouldn't. But some fires once lit burn hotter than any decree. But before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The sun beat down on the cracked earth, a relentless hammer on an anvil forging silence. Ilara lay amidst the wreckage of her world, not moving, not breathing, a ghost already, waiting for the buzzards to finish their circling dance. The scent of ash and the coppery tang of recent death clung to her, a suffocating shroud. Her small hands, grimy with dust and tears, still clutched a broken porcelain doll, its painted smile a mockery of the horror that had visited their small, isolated settlement. She was 14, but the light had been snuffed from her eyes days ago, leaving behind only the hollow chambers of profound shock. She did not know how long she had been there, a statue carved from grief and fear, but the thirst was a claw in her throat, and the sun, a persistent tormentor, seemed intent on melting her into the very soil. Each breath was a shallow, painful gasp, a testament to a life she no longer wished to claim. Her mind, a shattered kaleidoscope, offered fragmented images, the sudden guttural cries, the roar of flames, the screams that ended too abruptly, the cold, vacant stare of her mother's last breath. It was a nightmare that refused to recede with the dawn, clinging to her like the dust, pervasive and absolute. Then a shadow fell. Not the shadow of a buzzard, but something larger, more deliberate. Ilara did not stir, her eyes fixed on the shimmering heat haze that distorted the distant horizon. She had no more tears to shed, no more fear to summon. What more could be taken? A hand, strong and calloused, touched her shoulder. It was not gentle, nor was it rough. It was simply there, a presence. She flinched, a raw, involuntary tremor, a flicker of the life she thought was extinguished. She heard sounds, low and guttural, a language she did not understand, a melody of unfamiliar tones that carried both authority and a strange, deep quietude. She slowly raised her head, her gaze crawling up from the dirt, past dark buckskin to a face that was like the landscape itself, weathered, etched with stories she couldn't read, and eyes, dark and ancient, that held an unsettling stillness. He was a man of the desert, clearly, his skin tanned like worn leather, his hair long and black, woven with strips of sinew and feather. This was not the face of a white man, nor the face of the men who had brought the fire. This was something else entirely. His name was Kaya, though she would not know that for many days. He was the chief of a band of Diné, known to the white men as Navajo, and he had come across the devastation while tracking a raiding party, not their own. He had seen the carnage before, too many times. The settlements of the white men, often built on stolen land, burned to the ground by resentful tribes, or sometimes by outlaws, leaving no distinction, only destruction. He was accustomed to the stark realities of survival in this land, where life clung precariously to the edges of existence. Yet the sight of the small, motionless figure among the ashes struck a different chord. He was a leader, bound by the sacred laws of his people, by the unspoken wisdom of the land itself. The child was an anomaly, a fragment of an opposing world, yet undeniably, she was a survivor. To leave her was to defy the very spirit of life that struggled so fiercely in the desert. His warriors stood silently behind him, their faces impassive, their eyes like his, weighing the impossible equation. A white child, orphaned by the very conflicts that defined their era, found in the heart of territory claimed by the Diné. It was a risk, a question mark drawn in blood and dust. Kaya knelt, his movement fluid, unhurried, as if he were part of the earth itself. He offered her water, a small flask of cool liquid that tasted of life itself. Ilara, with a parched animalistic instinct, drank deeply, the relief and almost painful sensation spreading through her starved body. The thirst was a physical entity, a cruel tormentor now temporarily subdued. He did not speak again in her tongue, simply watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. There was no pity in them, not as she understood it, but rather a profound, almost primal understanding. was the understanding of one who had witnessed the fragility of life under a merciless sky. He gestured, a subtle motion of his chin towards the distant mountains, then back to her, a silent invitation, a path offered without words. She looked from him to the desolation, then back to him. What choice did she have? The familiar was gone, irrevocably consumed by fire and violence. The unknown, terrifying as it was, held the only promise of breath. Her head throbbed, her body ached, but a fragile thread of curiosity, of a desperate, unbidden hope began to weave itself through the emptiness within her. She pushed herself up, a slow, arduous effort, her legs unsteady beneath her. The world spun for a moment, then settled into a dizzying blur. She looked at him again, a gaunt, small figure against the vast, indifferent expanse. He extended a hand, not to help her, but simply to indicate the direction, a silent command. The unspoken weight of his decision, the ripple it would cause within his people, was already settling upon him. This wasn't merely saving a life, it was bringing a fractured piece of the opposing world into his own, a challenge to ancient ways. Yet, the choice had been made the moment he had seen her. Ilara followed, her small, dragging footsteps kicking up dust, a tiny, fragile shadow trailing the large, silent figure of the chief. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in violent hues of orange and red, as if mirroring the bloodshed that had occurred. The air, though still hot, carried a faint whispering chill, a reminder of the night that would soon descend upon the desert. She glanced back once at the smoldering ruins of her home, at the silent, unmoving forms of her family. No goodbye, no final farewell, just the stark, brutal truth of absence. The silence of the desert was immense, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps, the soft creak of leather, and the distant, lonely cry of a coyote. She was a leaf torn from its branch, carried by an unknown wind into an uncharted landscape. The future was a vast, terrifying void, but in the steadfast, unyielding presence of the silent man leading her, she found a strange, nascent sense of security. She had been saved, a miracle carved from despair, but the true journey, the defiance of every unspoken rule, had only just begun. The dust of the past clung to her, a suffocating memory, but the chief's presence, unwavering and silent, was a faint promise of a different kind of life, one she could not yet comprehend, one that would demand everything and offer the impossible. The desert, unforgiving and boundless, stretched before them, a witness to the beginning of an impossible story. The journey was a blur of parched earth and endless sky, punctuated by the chief's unyielding pace. Ilara moved like a phantom, her body running on fumes, her mind a blank canvas against the harsh artistry of the desert. She clung to the rhythm of his strides, a silent, primal heartbeat in the vastness. When they finally reached his encampment, the sight of the hogans, low and earth-toned, nestled into the landscape, seemed to shimmer like a mirage. The scent of wood smoke and unfamiliar foods, a stark contrast to the stench of ash and fear, filled the air, a foreign symphony to her battered senses. Her muscles screamed in protest, but the chief's silent command, a subtle nod, was enough to keep her moving forward. The initial reception was a tableau of wary curiosity. Faces, dark and unreadable, watched her from the shadows of doorways and around flickering campfires. Children, their eyes wide and solemn, peered at her from behind the skirts of their mothers. She was an alien in this world, a ghost in the vibrant tapestry of their lives. The whispers, soft and resonant in a tongue she couldn't decipher, were like a swarm of unseen insects buzzing around her, judging, questioning. She felt the weight of their gaze, the unspoken suspicion, the raw, undeniable difference that separated her from them, like an impassable canyon. Kuya, the chief, offered no explanation, no pronouncements. He simply led her to a small, empty hogan, a simple dwelling of packed earth and wood, its interior cool and dim. A thin blanket and a bowl of something warm and sustaining, a stew made from wild game and desert herbs, were placed before her. He left her there, alone with her exhaustion and the overwhelming strangeness of her new reality. The days that followed were a testament to Ilara's raw, unyielding will to survive. Her body, though frail, possessed a stubborn resilience. She ate what was offered, drank the clear, cold water, and slept deeply, sometimes haunted by the jagged edges of memory, sometimes simply falling into the merciful oblivion of utter exhaustion. The language was a wall, a barrier of incomprehensible sounds. She felt herself to be a creature without a voice, observing, absorbing, desperately trying to decipher the unwritten rules of this new world. She watched the women grind corn, weave intricate patterns on looms, prepare meals with an elegant efficiency. She saw the men tend to their horses, practice with bows and arrows, their movements graceful and economical. Life here was connected to the land, woven into its very fabric, a stark contrast to the structured, rigid existence she had known. Her past, once so solid, now felt like a fragile, distant dream, dissolving with each passing day. The echoes of her mother's gentle lullabies, her father's booming laughter, faded into the silence of the desert. Kaya was a constant, if distant, presence. He did not speak to her directly, not in words she could understand, but his dark eyes often found hers, a gaze that was neither harsh nor soft, simply discerning. He would watch her as she attempted to mimic the simple tasks of the women, her clumsy fingers struggling with the unfamiliar textures of wool or the coarse grains of corn. There was no mockery in his expression, only a quiet observation, a silent assessment of her adaptability. One afternoon, as she sat outside the hogan, attempting to braid strands of sinew, her fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar material, he stopped beside her. He knelt without a word and took the strands from her, his large, calloused hands demonstrating the technique with effortless precision. His movements were slow, deliberate, each twist and turn of the fibers a lesson in itself. He did not rush her, nor did he offer praise or criticism when she finally managed to replicate the simple knot. It was a moment of shared quietude, a flicker of connection that transcended the language barrier, a thread woven not of words, but of patience and understanding. This quiet tutelage, this unspoken communication became a subtle rhythm in her days. She learned to recognize the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight tilt of his head, the way his eyes would narrow when he was deep in thought. She began to understand that the chief was a man of immense responsibilities, carrying the weight of his people's survival on his broad shoulders. She would see him with the elders, their faces grim, their voices low as they discussed unseen threats, the encroaching shadows of the white world. She saw him with the young warriors, teaching them the ancient ways, instilling in them the discipline and wisdom of their ancestors. He was a pillar of his community, a silent sentinel against the encroaching tide. Yet with her, he was different, not soft, but deliberate, as if he were considering her, weighing her existence within the delicate balance of his world. There were, however, the whispers. She might not have understood the words, but the tones were universal. The sharp intakes of breath, the sidelong glances, the tightening of mouths, they were directed at her, the pale-skinned girl, the outsider, the white orphan. Some of the women, particularly the older ones, would turn their backs when she approached, or speak in even lower tones. The warriors, often stoic, would watch her with a calculating intensity that sometimes made her skin crawl. She was a disruption, a foreign element, a potential harbinger of trouble. She understood with the clarity of a child who has faced unimaginable loss that her presence was a burden, a risk to their carefully balanced existence. Yet Kaya never wavered in his silent protection. He never acknowledged the whispers, never offered a direct defense of her presence. He simply continued to treat her as an accepted, if unusual, member of the camp. It was a form of defiance in itself, a quiet assertion of his authority. The unspoken questions hung in the desert air, unanswered, yet profoundly present, shaping the fragile contours of Ilara's new life. She was no longer just an orphan. She was a paradox, a living question mark in a world defined by ancient traditions and growing tensions. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and something else, something metallic, something that spoke of distant thunder. Ilara, now known by her adopted Diné name, Tlijin, Black Horse for the dark intensity of her eyes and her unexpected resilience, felt a subtle shift in the camp's atmosphere. The quiet hum of daily life was punctuated by longer silences, the faces of the warriors often shadowed with a grim contemplation. She had been with Kaya's band for nearly a year, a time that had paradoxically felt both an eternity and a fleeting dream. She had learned the language, haltingly at first, then with a growing fluency enough to understand the hushed conversations around the campfires, the subtle inflections of worry in the elders' voices. The land, once alien and terrifying, had begun to reveal its secrets to her, its hidden springs, its edible plants, its myriad creatures. She could read the sky, predict the coming storms, and identify the distant call of an owl or the slither of a snake. She was not Dine, not truly, but she was no longer merely Elara, the lost white girl. She was something in between, a bridge made of flesh and bone, spanning two worlds. Her relationship with Kaya had deepened, not through effusive words, but through an intricate dance of unspoken understanding. He was the sun and the moon of her existence, the quiet anchor in her storm-tossed life. She had witnessed his wisdom in tribal councils, his unwavering resolve in the face of scarcity, his fierce loyalty to his people. He was a leader, yes, but he was also a man haunted by burdens she could only glimpse. Sometimes, late at night, she would see him sitting alone, silhouetted against the dying embers of a fire, his gaze fixed on the endless expanse of stars. It was a gaze that spoke of an ancient loneliness, of a deep sadness that permeated his very being. She longed to offer comfort, to bridge the silent chasm between them, but she feared to break the delicate equilibrium they had forged. Their interactions were marked by a profound respect, a quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence. He would bring her small gifts, a perfectly smooth river stone, a feather from a hawk, a meticulously carved piece of wood, always without fanfare, always leaving them by her hogan door or on her sleeping mat. These were not tokens of affection, not in the white man's way, but gestures of recognition, of value. The whispers, though muted, still persisted, growing in intensity as the seasons turned. She is a ghost from another world, some said, their voices laced with superstition. A pale omen, a bringer of sorrow. Others, more pragmatic, feared the attention her presence would draw from the white soldiers, the bounty hunters, the land-hungry settlers who pushed ever westward. She is a reason for them to come, warned Tallbear, a respected elder known for his rigid adherence to tradition. A spear dipped in honey. Kaya, though he heard them, rarely addressed these concerns directly. His silence was his answer, a firm, unyielding statement. Yet Elara sensed the strain in him, the growing weight of the internal conflict. His people were his life, his responsibility. To protect her, he was challenging the very fabric of their societal expectations, risking the unity of his band. She felt the irony of her situation keenly. Saved from one world, only to become a potential threat to another. One day, while gathering water from a distant spring, Elara saw them, dust motes dancing in the far distance, disturbed by unseen movement. She recognized the precise formation of mounted soldiers, their uniforms a stark, unwelcome contrast to the browns and ochres of the land. They were far, too far to be a direct threat, but their presence was a cold finger tracing patterns of dread on her skin. She raced back to the camp, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird, the water sloshing precariously from her animal skin bag. She found Kaya by the horse corrals, checking the horses with his usual quiet intensity. "Shamasani," she said, using the Dene word for white men, her voice breathless, trembling. "They are there, many of them." Kaya's gaze sharpened, his eyes, usually so still, now alive with an intense, almost predatory awareness. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and in that moment something shifted. The unspoken wall between them, built of custom and necessity, seemed to thin, becoming translucent. He saw not just the white girl, the orphan, but the woman she was becoming, strong and intuitive, capable of sensing danger as clearly as any of his own warriors. Her words were a confirmation of his own fears, of the uneasy premonitions that had plagued him for weeks. He nodded, a single decisive movement, and his eyes, for a fleeting instant, softened, a flash of something akin to gratitude, or perhaps something deeper, something that acknowledged her as more than just a responsibility. The news spread through the camp like wildfire, carried by the worried whispers of the women and the grim determination of the men. Preparations began with an eerie efficiency. Children were kept close, horses were secured, and the warriors sharpened their tools. their faces hardened by generations of conflict. Ilara watched it all, feeling the tension in the very air, a vibrating string pulled taut to breaking point. She knew with an instinct born of survival that her presence was inextricably linked to this escalating danger. This was not merely the white man's encroachment, it was the direct consequence of her being sheltered here. She was a silent accusation, a reason for conflict, a burden the chief had chosen to bear. In that moment, watching Kaya move among his people, his posture stoic, his voice calm yet authoritative, a profound realization bloomed within her. It was not gratitude, not merely respect. It was something more potent, more dangerous. It was a current, deep and powerful, pulling her towards him, a connection that defied logic, that ignored the chasm of their different worlds. The approaching storm was not just outside. It was brewing within her own heart, a dangerous, beautiful chaos. She knew with chilling certainty that the quiet peace they had built, the fragile truce with her own past, was about to shatter, forcing a choice that would redefine everything. This growing sense of connection, this burgeoning forbidden emotion, was both her sanctuary and her greatest vulnerability. The desert night deepened, a vast star-strewn tapestry above them, but within the hogan, the air was thick with the weight of unspoken words. The news of the soldiers had cast a long shadow, compressing the days into an urgent, taut silence. Ilara, now Tlijan, sat across from Kaya, the flickering firelight playing across the planes of his face, accentuating the lines of worry etched around his eyes. She had brought him a small meal, a gesture she now often made, a silent offering of care. He ate slowly, his gaze distant, as if seeing beyond the confines of the dwelling, into the perilous future. The comfortable silence that usually settled between them felt different tonight, charged with an almost unbearable tension. Every breath she took felt amplified, every rustle of the fire a thunderclap. The unspoken understanding between them, once a comforting blanket, now felt like a fragile thread, stretched taut, threatening to snap. Her mind was a maelstrom of thoughts, fragmented images of her past clashing with the stark reality of her present. The massacre, the blood, the sudden violent rupture of her childhood. These memories, once a dull ache, now pulsed with a terrifying immediacy. She had been a victim, utterly helpless. Now she was an accomplice, not by choice, but by presence. Her very existence, a living monument to an impossible bridge, was now a potential fuse. She saw the worry in the faces of the elders, the strained stoicism of the warriors, and knew it was, in part, because of her. She was a burden, a risk, a source of inevitable conflict. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth, saved from one destruction, only to become a catalyst for another. Kaya finished his meal, then pushed the bowl aside. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and the intensity of his gaze was a physical touch. His eyes, usually unreadable, seemed to hold a vast, ancient sorrow, a weariness that went beyond the immediate threat. "The land we stand on," he began, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the earth. "It has known many footsteps, many sorrows. The white man, he walks heavily. He does not listen to the whispers of the wind." His words were simple, yet imbued with the weight of generations, with the wisdom of a people intimately connected to the very dust beneath their feet. He spoke of the encroaching settlements, the broken treaties, the dwindling resources, the inevitable clash of two worlds that could not coexist without one consuming the other. His people, the Diné, were caught in the relentless tide of westward expansion, a tide that threatened to drown their traditions, their very way of life. "My people, they do not understand," he continued, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, his gaze still fixed on hers. "A white skin, a foreign tongue. They see the past in your presence. They see the future of our struggles." He did not condemn them or her. He simply stated the truth, a harsh, unvarnished reality. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, with the deep, insidious power of tribal law and societal expectation. She was the anomaly, the disruption, the symbol of the impossible. And yet, he had chosen her. He had brought her in, protected her, allowed her to learn their ways. The quiet defiance of that act, The profound risk he had undertaken now shone with startling clarity. "I know," Ilara whispered, her voice a thin, reedy sound in the vast silence. It was the first time they had truly spoken about the chasm between them, the fundamental divide that structured their lives. "I am a burden." Kaya's eyes, which had been distant, now focused on her with an unnerving intensity. "No." The word was sharp, immediate, a stark denial that cut through the air. "You are not a burden. You are a test, a choice." He paused, his gaze dropping to the flickering fire, then rising again, his expression now unshielded, raw. "When I found you, amidst the ashes, you were a flicker, a spirit clinging to life. To leave you would have been to deny the sacred." His voice was lower now, almost a murmur, revealing a vulnerability she had never witnessed before. "It would have been to deny a part of myself." In that moment, the subtle undercurrent that had flowed between them, unspoken and unacknowledged, suddenly surged, breaking through the dam of their unspoken fears and cultural divides. It was not a sudden burst of passion, but a slow, inexorable tide, pulling them closer. His words, so simple yet so profound, resonated deep within her, echoing the truth of her own yearning. She saw him not just as chief, not just as her rescuer, but as a man burdened by an impossible responsibility, yet capable of an extraordinary, defiant tenderness. The air thickened with unspoken emotion, with the sheer weight of what his revelation meant. It was a confession not of love, but of a connection so deep it defied logic, a bond forged in the crucible of tragedy, and a shared struggle for existence. Their eyes met again, and in that protracted gaze, something shifted irrevocably. The world outside, with its encroaching soldiers and its ancient prejudices, seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them, suspended in a fragile bubble of understanding. The unspoken rules of their disparate worlds, the clear boundaries between white and Diné, male and female, chief and orphan, suddenly seemed flimsy, inconsequential. A dangerous, forbidden spark had ignited, not in a blaze, but in the smoldering embers of shared experience and an undeniable, magnetic pull. It was a recognition, a deep, resonant hum between two souls who had found an impossible kinship in the heart of a world determined to keep them apart. This was no fleeting attraction. It was the slow, deliberate blossoming of a love that defied logic, challenged tradition, and promised only heartbreak or an unimaginable triumph. The choice, the test, was no longer just for him. It was for both of them, and the path ahead was shrouded in the dust of their unspoken desires and the looming shadow of an inevitable storm. The air in the hogan shimmered with an almost unbearable stillness after Kaya's quiet admission. The words, simple yet profound, had stripped away the layers of chief and orphan, revealing the raw, exposed nerves of two human beings bound by something deeper than circumstance. Ilara felt a tremor run through her, a tremor that was both fear and an intoxicating thrill. The unspoken truth, hovering between them like a heat haze, solidified into an undeniable presence. This was not the kind of affection she had known, or even understood in her previous life. It was a connection forged in the crucible of survival, tempered by shared silence, and intensified by the constant looming threat of the outside world. It was a love born of defiance, of an unyielding spirit that sought connection amidst desolation. Kaya rose then, his movements fluid and unhurried, yet imbued with a new tension. He walked to the entrance of the hogan, pausing there, his broad back to her, as if contemplating the vastness of the night sky or perhaps the immensity of the challenge that now lay before them. His silence was a tangible thing, heavy with the weight of responsibility, of tradition, of the countless generations that had shaped his people's path. He was a chief, a guardian of his culture, and to embrace a love for a white woman, an outsider, an embodiment of the very force that threatened his people, was an act of profound, almost suicidal rebellion against every fiber of his being, every law he had sworn to uphold. Ilara felt the intensity of his internal struggle as if it were her own, a silent battle raging within him, between duty and a burgeoning, dangerous desire. She watched him, her heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs, the fear of losing him, of being cast out, of being truly alone again in this vast, unforgiving land, was a cold dread twisting in her gut. But stronger, more vibrant, was the fierce, unbidden desire to bridge the remaining distance between them, to claim the impossible connection that had just been acknowledged. The rules were clear, etched in the very landscape, whispered by the ancestors, reinforced by the stark realities of their warring worlds. White and Dene did not mix, not in this way. Their union would be seen as a defilement by some, a dangerous alliance by others, a weakness in the eyes of their enemies. It was an act of sacrilege, a betrayal of everything they knew. He turned, his face illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the entrance flap. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a vulnerability that stole her breath. He extended a hand, not reaching for her but offering a silent invitation. It was a gesture that transcended language, a profound question posed in the desert quiet. It asked, "Do you dare?" Ilara rose, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her, as if she were walking on the edge of a precipice. The small distance between them felt like an infinite canyon. Every step she took was a conscious choice, a silent declaration against the world, against the past, against the very concept of what was possible. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as they touched his. His skin was warm, calloused, rough from years of living off the land, of wielding tools and weapons. Her own hands, though no longer soft, felt fragile in his grasp. The contact was a jolt, a silent acknowledgement of the raw, undeniable current that now flowed between them. It was a touch that spoke of promise and peril, of a defiant courage that would reshape their lives. Just as their fingers intertwined, a guttural cry, sharp and sudden, pierced the night. It was the warning cry of a sentry, a sound that brought every warrior to a state of instant, predatory readiness. The delicate bubble of their shared moment shattered, replaced by the harsh, immediate reality of external threat. Kaya's grip on her hand tightened, a brief possessive squeeze before he released it, his face transforming from vulnerability to the stone-hard mask of the chief, the warrior. He was already moving, striding out of the hogan, his senses honed, his body poised for battle. Ilara followed him, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. The whispers of the camp, once hushed and fearful, now rose in a cacophony of urgent shouts and the rhythmic thud of running feet. The soldiers, it seemed, had arrived. The distant dust she had seen had not been a fleeting observation, but a harbinger, a signal of an inevitable collision. The Shamasani, the white men, were here. Their presence was not just a threat to the Dene, but a direct consequence of the forbidden love that had just dared to bloom in the heart of their camp. Irony, cruel and unyielding, pressed down upon her. Her very presence, the unspoken bond, had drawn the attention, the danger, and now they would all pay the price. Kaya was already barking orders, his voice strong and authoritative, cutting through the fear. Warriors moved swiftly, silently, taking up positions, their bows strung, their rifles loaded. The camp transformed from a peaceful haven to a fortified outpost, ready for war. Ilara stood on the periphery, a small, pale figure, her presence a silent testament to the impossible choices that had led them to this moment. She looked at Kaya, at the fierce determination in his posture, the unyielding strength in his eyes. He was a leader, a protector, but now he was also a man who had, in the quiet of his hogan, dared to defy the rules of his world for her. The battle that was about to unfold was not just for land or survival. It was for the very right of their impossible love to exist. The spark had ignited, forbidden and dangerous, and now the flames threatened to consume everything. The storm had not merely arrived, it had broken, unleashing its fury upon a love that defied all boundaries. The choice had been made. Now the consequences must be faced. The first shots ripped through the pre-dawn quiet, shattering the illusion of peace like fragile glass. The air vibrated with the sudden, terrible cacophony of rifle fire, guttural war cries, and the desperate whinny of horses. Ilara, huddled with the women and children in the relative safety of the central hogan, felt the impact of each bullet, each thudding boot, as if it struck her own body. The earth beneath her trembled, a living thing convulsing in agony. The screams, some of pain, some of fear, were universal, cutting across the cultural divide. She remembered the screams of her own family, the burning scent of their home, and a cold dread, familiar and absolute, wrapped around her heart. This was the consequence, the brutal reckoning for a love that dared to defy the established order. Through the narrow opening of the hogan, she glimpsed flashes of movement, the dark, swift figures of the Diné warriors, almost invisible in the fading darkness, their movements precise and deadly. The stark, rigid uniforms of the soldiers, a jarring contrast against the earthy hues of the camp. The conflict was relentless, a brutal dance of death played out on the sacred ground of a people fighting for their very existence. Every shot, every cry was a blow to her spirit, a testament to the unforgiving nature of this land, where survival was a constant, bloody struggle. She thought of Kaya, out there in the maelstrom, leading his warriors, his strength an unyielding beacon against the encroaching darkness. Her heart twisted with a desperate fear for him, a fear that transcended the terror for her own life. Suddenly a warrior, a young man she recognized as Silent Runner, stumbled into the hogan, his arm clutching a gaping wound, blood seeping through his fingers. His face was contorted in pain, but his eyes held a desperate warning. He gasped out words in Diné, words she now understood too well. Many, too many, they come from the canyon side. The soldiers, it seemed, had flanked them, exploiting a weakness in their defenses. Panic, cold and sharp, rippled through the women. The elder women, their faces etched with centuries of sorrow and resilience, began to chant, a low, mournful song of protection and courage, their voices a balm against the rising tide of fear. Alara looked from Silent Runner's bleeding wound to the terrified faces of the children. She saw the despair in the eyes of the mothers, the grim resignation in the posture of the old ones. And then she looked towards the hogan entrance, towards the sounds of battle, towards Kaya. She could not stand idly by. Her life had been saved, she had been sheltered, loved in a way she never expected. Now she would not be a mere witness to their destruction. She would not be a burden. A fierce, unbidden resolve, born of the same raw courage that had carried her through her own tragedy, surged through her. She moved, not with the practiced ease of a warrior, but with a desperate, unwavering purpose. She grabbed a small, sharp knife used for cutting hides and tied a piece of cloth around her face, mimicking the warriors, an act of defiance, of belonging. One of the older women, a stern-faced woman named Atsa, who had always viewed Alara with suspicion, caught her arm. "Where do you go, white-skin?" she hissed, her voice laced with ancient prejudice. "This is not your fight." Alara met her gaze, her own eyes blazing with a newfound determination. "This is my fight, Atsa," she retorted, her Diné strong and clear. "My life is here. My heart is here. If they fall, I fall with them." She pulled free, leaving the older woman momentarily stunned by her unexpected ferocity. The words were a direct challenge, not just to Atsa, but to the very concept of her being an outsider. She was staking her claim, not just on a place, but on a people, and on the man who led them. She emerged from the hogan, stepping into the chaos, a small, vulnerable figure armed with nothing but a knife and an indomitable will. The battle was raging, a brutal, desperate struggle for every inch of ground. She saw Kaya then, a powerful, commanding presence, his rifle spitting fire, his face grim with the weight of leadership and battle. He moved with a warrior's grace, a force of nature against the encroaching tide of blue uniforms. She saw him fall back, his men outnumbered, struggling against the relentless assault from the canyon. He was fighting for his people, but he was also fighting for the impossible dream that had taken root in his heart. A stray bullet whizzed past her ear, kicking up dust inches from her foot. She barely flinched. Her gaze was fixed on Kaya, a silent prayer, a fierce declaration of loyalty. She did not know what she could do, but she knew she could not simply hide. She scanned the battlefield, her mind racing, searching for a way to make a difference, however small. She saw a supply wagon, left by the soldiers, its wheels stuck in a rut. A desperate, dangerous idea sparked in her mind. It was a long shot, a foolish gamble. But in the chaos of battle, sometimes the most unexpected move could turn the tide. The rules of engagement were clear. Stay safe. Hide. But for Alara, all rules had already been broken. She was fighting not just for survival, but for the right of their impossible love to exist. This was her defiant stand. The air itself seemed to crackle with the fury of the battle, each gust of wind carrying the scent of gunpowder and the raw tang of fear. Ilara, her small knife clutched tightly in her hand, moved through the pandemonium with a singular focus, her eyes fixed on the distant supply wagon. The earth bucked beneath her feet, a living creature groaning under the weight of the conflict. She saw a young warrior, no older than herself, fall, his body crumpling like a discarded doll. The sight ignited a cold, hard rage within her, a fierce refusal to surrender to despair. This wasn't just about saving herself, it was about saving them, the people who had offered her shelter, and the man who had dared to love her. She weaved through the desperate skirmish, avoiding stray bullets and flailing bodies, her movements fueled by a primal instinct for survival. Her ears pounded with the sounds of battle, but her mind was clear, focused on the wagon. It was a makeshift fortress of supplies, likely containing ammunition and provisions for the soldiers, but it was also a strategic vulnerability, a potential weapon if used correctly. She saw two soldiers attempting to free its stuck wheel, their backs to the main skirmish, their attention diverted by the recalcitrant wagon. This was her chance. A flashback, sudden and sharp, pierced through the chaos. Her father, strong and laughing, teaching her to tie a complex knot, one that could secure a wagon load, or, conversely, unravel it quickly. The memory, once a source of gentle nostalgia, now became a vital tool for survival. Irony, a bitter mistress, twisted her gut. The skills taught by the very world that now sought to destroy her adopted home would now be used against it. She darted forward, a shadow against the dim light of dawn, slipping past a fallen horse, its eyes wide and still in death. The two soldiers, grunting with effort, were oblivious to her approach. One had his rifle leaning against the wagon wheel, its barrel pointed away from her. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Ilara launched herself forward, not at the men, but at the wagon itself. Her small hands, surprisingly strong, worked with a furious precision, unraveling the ropes that held the supplies. She tugged at the canvas cover, exposing the contents: wooden crates, sacks of flour, and, crucially, boxes of ammunition. One of the soldiers finally turned, alerted by the sudden movement, his eyes widening in surprise as he saw the small, dust-smeared girl attacking their supplies. He raised his rifle, but before he could aim, Ilara had already snatched up a small oil lamp, its glass cracked but still containing fuel, and tossed it with surprising force towards the open box of ammunition. It wasn't a direct hit, but the lamp shattered against the wood, splashing oil over the cartridges. "What the hell?" the soldier yelled, startled, dropping his rifle. Before he could recover, Ilara had already grabbed a blazing torch from a nearby extinguished campfire, its embers still glowing fiercely, and flung it into the wagon. The flame caught, igniting the oil with a sudden whooshing roar. The first soldier cried out, dropping his rifle, as the flames licked up the side of the wagon. The second soldier, momentarily stunned, stared at the inferno, his face illuminated by the flickering fire. A deafening explosion ripped through the air. The ammunition, ignited by the flames, detonated with a thunderous roar, sending shrapnel and splinters of wood flying in every direction. The force of the blast threw Ilara backward, sending her sprawling in the dust. The two soldiers were caught directly in the explosion, their cries cut short by the devastating force. The wagon, once a symbol of their supplies, was now a fiery wreckage, a crater of destruction. The explosion, raw and terrifying, momentarily silenced the battlefield. Both sides paused, stunned by the sudden, unexpected devastation. For a precious few seconds, an eerie stillness descended, broken only by the crackle of the burning wagon and the stunned silence of the combatants. Then, the Dene warriors, their spirits momentarily buoyed by the unexpected chaos, let out a renewed, triumphant war cry. They had seen the explosion, recognized the source, and a surge of renewed hope coursed through their ranks. Kya, catching sight of the burning wagon, and then, impossibly, Ilara, scrambling to her feet in the dust, felt a primal surge of pride and a cold, sharp dread. She was alive, but she had put herself in unimaginable peril. The soldiers, disoriented and demoralized by the unexpected explosion in their rear, faltered. Their lines broke. Their advance stuttered. This was the moment the Diné had been waiting for. Kaya, his voice ringing out above the remaining din, rallied his warriors. They surged forward, a swift, dark tide pressing their advantage, driving the shocked soldiers back. The battle, though far from over, had irrevocably shifted. Ilara, dazed but unhurt, watched the tide turn, a fierce satisfaction blooming in her chest. She had done something. She had not been helpless. But as she looked at the carnage, at the wounded and the dying, a profound weariness settled over her. The cost of survival was immense, soaked in blood and sorrow. The rules of their world, the harsh realities of conflict, would always demand a price. Her act of defiance, born of love and desperation, had perhaps saved them today, but the ripples of consequence would stretch far into the future. The war was not just on the battlefield. It was in the hearts of those who fought, those who survived, and those who dared to love against all odds. The aftermath of the explosion was a brutal tableau. The acrid scent of gunpowder and burning wood still clung to the air, mingling with the coppery tang of fresh blood. The sounds of battle had subsided, replaced by the low moans of the wounded, the hushed cries of the women tending to them, and the grim, quiet assessment of loss. The sun, now fully risen, cast a harsh, unforgiving light on the wreckage, splintered wood, scattered bodies, and the smoldering remains of the supply wagon. It was a victory, undeniably, but a victory carved from the raw material of sorrow. The soldiers had retreated, disorganized and demoralized, leaving behind their dead and the shattered remnants of their offensive. But this was not the end. It was merely a temporary reprieve, a pause in the relentless tide of conflict. Ilara, her clothes torn and dust-stained, felt a profound weariness settle deep into her bones. Her body ached from the physical exertion, but it was her spirit that felt truly battered. She had faced death, not as a helpless victim, but as an active participant, and the experience had left an indelible mark. The explosion, her act of desperate courage, had saved the day, perhaps saved the camp, but the cost was etched into the faces of the Diné, the quiet grief in the eyes of the women, the solemn, resolute expressions of the warriors. She saw the irony clearly. She had used the white man's methods, his own tools of destruction, against him, to protect the people who had given her a new life. It was a brutal paradox, a testament to the blurring lines between two worlds. Kaya found her standing amidst the debris, a small, fragile figure against the vast, indifferent landscape. His face was grim, streaked with dirt and blood, his eyes weary but still intensely focused. He said nothing, simply reached out and took her hand. His grip was firm, reassuring, a silent acknowledgement of her actions, of the courage she had shown. There was no praise in his gaze, no effusive words, only a deep, resonant understanding. He knew what she had done, the risk she had taken, the defiance she had embodied, and in that moment the silent bond between them, already forged in adversity, tightened, becoming an unyielding, unbreakable thread. He led her away from the immediate scene of carnage, towards the quiet solitude of his hogan. The camp was slowly coming back to life, the women resuming their tasks, their movements subdued, the men tending to their wounds, their voices low. The children, previously hidden, now emerged, their faces still wide with fear, their eyes taking in the grim reality of the aftermath. As they walked, Ilara felt the weight of their gazes, not of suspicion this time, but of a grudging respect, perhaps even awe. Her actions had changed their perception of her, transforming her from a mere outsider into a protector, a warrior in her own right. Inside the hogan, the silence was profound, broken only by the crackle of the small fire in the center. Kaya cleaned a shallow cut on her arm, his hands gentle, his touch surprisingly tender. His focus was entirely on her, his warrior's intensity now channeled into an act of care. "Why did you do this, Tlijan?" he asked, his voice a low rumble filled with an unspoken depth. It was not a question of accusation, but of profound inquiry. Ilara met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "You saved me," she said, her voice raspy from smoke and dust. "You gave me life when I had none. These are your people, my people now. I could not stand by and watch." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her conviction, the fierce loyalty that had taken root in her heart. She looked at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes, at the undeniable connection that stretched between them, a tangible current in the air. And she hesitated, then continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. I could not lose you. The confession hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, mirroring the unspoken love that had ignited between them. Kaya's eyes darkened, a shadow of pain passing over them, a deep, ancient sorrow that transcended the immediate conflict. He knew the cost of such a confession, the peril it brought. The path we walk, it is fraught with thorns, Tlijin, he murmured, his gaze distant, as if seeing the relentless challenges that lay ahead. The rules, they are etched deep, in the white man's world and in ours. He spoke of the inevitable judgment, the suspicion, the very real dangers that a union between a Diné chief and a white woman would invoke from both societies. His people, despite her heroics, would still be divided, and the white world would see only a savage chief taking a white captive, a transgression that would justify further violence. Then we make our own path, Ilara countered, her voice firm, unwavering despite the fear that still gnawed at her. We break the rules. We defy them all. It was a bold declaration, born of desperation and an unyielding love. She understood the weight of her words, the magnitude of the challenge. This was not a romantic fantasy. It was a desperate plea for a life that defied every norm, every expectation. The cost of such defiance was clear. Constant vigilance, unending struggle, and perhaps ultimate tragedy. But the alternative, a life without him, a life without the connection that had given her purpose, felt infinitely worse. Kaya's gaze returned to her, his eyes holding hers, a profound mixture of admiration, sorrow, and an undeniable fierce love. He knew the world would never truly accept them. Not in this way, not in this time. But as he looked at her, at the small, courageous woman who had brought light into his burdened existence, he knew he could not deny the truth that echoed in her words and in his own heart. The battle had been won, but the greater fight, the fight for their impossible love, had only just begun. The embers of hope flickered amidst the ashes of conflict, a fragile promise in a world determined to extinguish it. Their defiance was a gamble, a desperate, beautiful gamble. But for the first time in a long time he saw a path, however narrow, that might lead not to peace, but to a deeper, more meaningful existence. The scars of the day were fresh, but the spirit of their defiance was unbreakable. The quiet aftermath of the battle settled over the camp like a heavy blanket. Not quite peace, but a pause, a collective breath held taut. The air still hummed with the echoes of violence. The ground still remembered the tremors of conflict. Yet life, stubborn and insistent, began to reassert its rhythms. Women moved among the hogans, tending to the wounded, their faces etched with a weariness that ran bone deep. The warriors, some with bandaged limbs, others with a new quiet solemnity in their eyes, gathered their weapons, their vigilance never truly ceasing. Ilara, now more Tlijin than Ilara, moved among them, her actions deliberate, her presence no longer questioned but accepted, almost revered. Her courage in the face of fire, her selfless act of defiance, had spoken louder than any words, silencing the whispers of prejudice and suspicion. She was no longer just the white orphan. She was a warrior, a protector, one of them, by action and by blood. Yet this hard-won acceptance came with its own shadow. The bond between her and Kaya, once a secret, now pulsed with an undeniable intensity, a visible current that drew the eyes of all who witnessed it. Their glances lingered. Their proximity, even in the midst of communal tasks, spoke volumes. The elders, their faces often grave, would watch them from the shadows, their ancient eyes holding a mixture of respect for the chief's choice and a deep-seated apprehension for the consequences. Tall Bear, particularly, remained a silent, disapproving presence, his gaze a constant, unspoken question. The love that had blossomed between Kaya and Ilara was a defiant bloom in a harsh desert, beautiful but dangerous, a challenge to centuries of tradition, a direct affront to the clear, stark rules of their world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues that mirrored the recent conflict, Kaya called a council of the elders. Ilara watched from a distance, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She knew the subject of their discussion, knew the difficult path he was choosing, the immense personal sacrifice he was making for her, for them. His voice, though low, carried on the evening breeze, strong and resonant. She didn't need to understand every word. The posture of the elders, the weight of their silence, conveyed the depth of their concerns. He was pleading his case, arguing for her acceptance, arguing for their right to exist together. It was a perilous journey, a crossing of a chasm carved not by land, but by generations of blood and belief. Later, Kaya came to her hogan, his face unreadable, his movement slow with the weight of the meeting. He sat across from her by the dying embers of the fire, the silence between them stretched taut. They spoke of the spirits of our ancestors, he began, his voice a low murmur, of the sacred laws, of the consequences of turning from the path, of the white man's ways, and the dangers they bring. He spoke of the ancient warnings, the prophecies of dissolution, the fear that a union like theirs would weaken the tribe, dilute their blood, break their connection to the land and the old ways. He spoke of his duty, his haju, the sacred balance of his people's world, which he was now challenging for a love that defied all rules. "What did you say?" Ilara whispered, her throat tight with apprehension. Kaya's eyes, dark and ancient, met hers across the flickering light. "I spoke of the sacredness of life," he said, his voice steady, unwavering, "of the spirit that clings to life, even when all seems lost. I spoke of your courage, Tlijin, of your heart. I told them that sometimes the old paths must bend to make way for new growth, for a different kind of strength." He paused, a deep sigh escaping him, a sound that spoke of the immense burden he carried. "They have agreed to let you remain, to let our bond be acknowledged." A wave of dizzying relief washed over Ilara, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. She had been accepted. Their love, however impossible, had been given a tentative space to exist. But Kaya's next words tempered her brief surge of hope, grounding it in the harsh reality of their world. "But it is not without a price," he continued, his voice heavy with resignation. "There are those who will not forget, those who will always see you as an outsider, a source of trouble. And the white man, his anger will be great. Your survival, our survival, will require constant vigilance, constant struggle. This is not peace, Tlijin. It is a new kind of war." He spoke of the whispers that would continue, the sidelong glances, the unspoken judgments. He spoke of the dangers from outside, the heightened scrutiny from the soldiers, the renewed zeal of the bounty hunters who would seek to claim the white woman who had chosen a Diné chief. He spoke of the possibility of tribal factions, of dissent simmering beneath the surface, threatening the unity he had worked so hard to maintain. Their love, born of defiance, now demanded a perpetual state of readiness, a constant battle against forces both seen and unseen. Ilara looked at him, at the man who had risked everything, his leadership, his standing, even the unity of his people, for her. A profound realization settled within her. Their love was not a soft cushion, a comforting escape from the harshness of the world. It was a crucible, a furnace in which they would be tested, refined, perhaps even consumed. It was a dangerous, beautiful, and utterly defiant act, but in his eyes, in the quiet strength that radiated from him, she saw a reflection of her own unyielding spirit. "Then we will fight," she said, her voice clear and strong, unwavering. "We will fight every day, for our right to be, for our right to love." The words were a vow, a solemn oath exchanged not under a starry sky, but under the harsh, unblinking gaze of a world that refused to accept them. Their journey was not towards an idyllic horizon, but into the eye of a gathering storm, where their defiance would be their only shield, and their love, their most dangerous weapon. The rules were broken, and now they would face the consequences together. The desert landscape, a silent witness to their defiant love, stretched endlessly under a sky that seemed perpetually bruised. The agreement from the elders, a fragile truce born of respect for Kaya's leadership and Ilara's courage, was a delicate thing, easily shattered. The immediate threat of the soldiers had receded, but a new, more insidious tension settled over the Diné camp. The whispers, though less overt, had not vanished. They had simply mutated, transforming from suspicion into a quiet, simmering resentment in some corners, a worried fatalism in others. Ilara felt the weight of it, the constant scrutiny, the profound responsibility that came with being the reason for this unprecedented challenge to tradition. Her love for Kaya, once a solace, now felt like a heavy burden, a constant reminder of the impossible tightrope they walked. Kaya, too, felt the strain. His leadership, while affirmed by the elders, was subtly undermined by the dissent that simmered beneath the surface. He was still chief, still revered, but there was a new distance, a subtle shift in the way some of his warriors met his gaze, a quiet challenge in the way certain families held themselves apart. He had chosen, unequivocally, to defy the rules, to place his heart's desire, and the life of one outsider, above the rigid structures of his people. The decision, though born of love and conviction, had created a rift, a crack in the ancient foundation of their unity. He bore the weight of it with his characteristic stoicism, his face revealing nothing of the torment that raged within him. But Ilara, so attuned to his quiet language, could sense the weary sorrow that clung to him like dust. One day, an old woman, a healer named Astzaata, woman of 3, whose eyes held the wisdom of countless seasons, sought Ilara out. She did not speak of the battle, nor of Kaya. Instead, she spoke in riddles, in metaphors woven from the desert itself. "The river seeks its own path, little bird," she rasped, her voice dry as ancient leaves. "But the rocks do not easily move. Sometimes the river must flow around them. Sometimes it must carve them away. And sometimes the river breaks against them." Her eyes, sharp and knowing, pierced Ilara, reading the unspoken fears in her heart. "Your love is a river, and the rules are the mountains. This land, it demands a heavy price for breaking its forms." The words were a stark warning, a reminder of the unforgiving nature of their chosen path, of the consequences that would inevitably follow. Ilara felt the chilling truth of it, the cold reality of their defiance. The external threats, too, began to escalate. Rumors carried on the wind spoke of more soldiers gathering at distant forts, their anger stoked by the ambush of their men. Bounty hunters, drawn by the whispers of a white woman living with a Diné chief, began to scour the outer reaches of their territory, their intentions clear and dangerous. Kaya redoubled his vigilance, sending out scouts, constantly moving the camp to avoid detection. The nomadic life, once a seasonal rhythm, became a desperate flight, a constant evasion. There was no true rest, no true peace. Every shadow held a potential threat, every distant sound a harbinger of danger. It was during one of these frantic movements, as the tribe packed up their meager belongings under the cover of darkness, that Kaya shared a piece of his past with Ilara, a revelation that deepened her understanding of his choices and the burdens he carried. They sat by a dying fire, the stars above them a scattering of cold diamonds. "My first wife, she was taken," he began, his voice a low, rough whisper, "by the Comanches, a raid, many years ago. I was young, just learning the path of a warrior. I swore I would never let another I cared for be taken by the hands of others." His eyes, ancient and sorrowful, met hers. "That vow, it burns within me. It guides my decisions. To save you, to protect you, was not just a choice, Tlijin. It was the honoring of a sacred promise made to a ghost." The revelation hung in the air, heavy with the weight of past sorrow and present responsibility. Ilara understood then, with a profound clarity, that her presence was not just a love, but a redemption for him, a chance to fulfill a vow made in the face of unspeakable loss. His choice, his defiance of the rules, was rooted not just in his burgeoning love for her, but in a deep personal history of pain and an unshakable commitment to protection. The burden he carried, the dangers he courted for their love, were amplified by the echoes of his past. He was not just fighting for a future with her, he was fighting to right the wrongs of a past he could not change. This shared vulnerability, this glimpse into his profound sorrow, solidified their bond, deepening it beyond the physical, beyond even the emotional. It became a spiritual connection, two souls recognizing and embracing each other's deepest wounds and fiercest desires. Their love was a defiance against fate, against tradition, against the very world that sought to break them. But this defiance came at a cost. The world was closing in, its net tightening. The unspoken questions from his people, the relentless pursuit from the white men, the haunting memories of his past losses, all converged, forming a tightening noose around their fragile, impossible love. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here, unleashing its full fury, threatening to consume them both in its merciless embrace. The rules, once challenged, now exacted their vengeance, demanding a reckoning that would test the very limits of their endurance and their unwavering love. The desert, usually a stoic sentinel, seemed to hold its breath, sensing the encroaching storm. Days bled into weeks, each one a relentless test of their resolve, a slow, agonizing tightening of the noose. The constant movement of the Diné band, a desperate game of hide-and-seek, wore on everyone. Faces grew gaunt, eyes shadowed with fatigue. The children, usually so vibrant, clung closer to their mothers, their laughter hushed, replaced by the low hum of anxiety that permeated the camp. Ilara, now deeply woven into the fabric of their lives, felt every tremor, every shift in the wind, every unspoken fear that permeated the air. Her own weariness was a physical ache, but her spirit, hardened by the constant struggle, remained fiercely defiant. The love for Kaya, now a searing, undeniable presence, was her anchor and her fire. The scouts brought grim news. The soldiers, under the command of a ruthless colonel known for his Indian hunting prowess, were closing in. They had brought trackers, men skilled in reading the subtlest signs on the land, and they were relentless. Their numbers were far greater than any previous engagement, their intent clear: to crush the Diné resistance and, perhaps, to retrieve the white woman who had dared to choose a savage chief. The bounty on Ilara's head, whispered amongst the few white traders who dared approach their territory, had swelled to an exorbitant sum, marking her as a prize, a symbol of defiance that infuriated the encroaching world. Kaya, his face a mask of grim determination, spent long hours with his warriors, planning, strategizing. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but their spirit remained unbroken. He spoke of the ancient ways, of their ancestors who had faced overwhelming odds and found strength in unity, in cunning, in their unbreakable connection to the land. Ilara watched him, her heart aching with a fierce pride and a terrible fear. He was their leader, their protector, burdened by the immense responsibility of his people's survival, and yet he still carried the unspoken weight of their impossible love. One night, as they huddled together for warmth, the air growing cold with the approach of winter, a rare, vulnerable moment passed between them. Kaya, his arm resting lightly around her, spoke of his people's spirit, of their deep connection to the earth, to the sacred mountains, to the very cycle of life and death. "We are of this land, Tlijin," he murmured, his voice low, resonating with a profound truth. "Our spirits are woven into the rocks, the rivers, the breath of the wind. To lose this land is to lose ourselves." He spoke not of surrender, but of the ultimate stakes, the existential threat they faced. And then his voice softened almost imperceptibly. "And to lose you, that would be to lose a new part of myself, a path I did not know existed." Ilara leaned into his touch, her eyes wet with unshed tears. The raw honesty of his words was a powerful confession, a testament to the profound shift she had brought into his life, a disruption of his ancient world. Their love was not just a personal bond. It was a symbol, a beacon of defiance in a world determined to extinguish it. It was a love that asked the impossible, demanded the unthinkable, and offered only the tenuous promise of survival against overwhelming odds. She knew with chilling certainty that the coming confrontation would be their crucible, the ultimate test of their commitment, their strength, and their very right to exist. A chilling silence descended upon the camp as the scouts confirmed the inevitable. The soldiers were less than a day's ride away. They were too numerous, too well equipped to evade. There would be no more running. The final confrontation was at hand. Kaya gathered his warriors, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering as he spoke of their sacred duty, of the spirit of their ancestors. He spoke of fighting not for victory, but for honor, for their right to hold on to their land, their identity. He did not speak of retreat, only of defiance. Elara stood among the women, her hand gripping the small, sharp knife she had used before. There would be no hiding this time. She would stand with them, fight with them, whatever the cost. She saw the fear in the eyes of the young mothers, the quiet resolve in the faces of the elders, and she saw Kaya, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun, a monument of strength and determination. He was preparing for war, for a battle that would decide their fate, and perhaps the fate of their impossible love. The rules were clear. The white man would claim the land, crush the resistance, punish the defiance, and the Diné would fight, defending their sacred earth, their ancient traditions, their very right to exist. But Elara and Kaya had broken those rules, creating their own, a bond forged in fire and defiance. The coming battle was not just a clash of cultures, but a brutal reckoning for their forbidden love. It was a collision of worlds, a final, desperate stand against an unyielding tide. The dark, tense anticipation of the battle hung in the air, thick and suffocating, a promise of bloodshed and sorrow. The world outside had finally caught up to their defiance, and now, the price would be paid. The dawn broke in a blaze of brutal clarity, painting the sky with the same fiery hues that would soon stain the earth. The air was still and cold, a heavy silence pregnant with the impending storm. The Diné camp, nestled precariously in a narrow canyon, was a tableau of grim resolve. Warriors, their faces painted with ancient symbols of protection and defiance, stood ready, their rifles and bows held firm. Women, their faces etched with quiet grief and fierce determination, gathered the children, preparing for the worst, their voices a low, mournful hum of ancient prayers. Elara, her hands gripping a small loaded rifle given to her by one of the younger warriors, stood beside Kaya, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was no marksman, but she would not be a mere spectator. This was her fight, their fight, for their right to simply exist. The first sounds were distant, a low rumble like approaching thunder, growing steadily louder. The rhythmic thud of horses' hooves on hard earth, the jingle of harness, the faint, tinny sound of bugles. The soldiers were here. A sea of blue uniforms, a seemingly endless tide of men and horses poured into the canyon entrance, their movements precise, organized, overwhelming. Their leader, a corpulent, grim-faced colonel, sat atop a magnificent black stallion, his gaze fixed on the small, defiant camp, a sneer twisting his lips. He was the embodiment of the unforgiving world that sought to crush them, to erase their very existence. The battle erupted with a sudden, deafening roar. Rifle fire ripped through the air, sharp and relentless, met by the defiant cries of the Diné. Arrows flew, swift and deadly, finding their marks. The canyon became a crucible, a furnace of conflict where two worlds collided in a brutal, desperate dance of death. Smoke, thick and acrid, quickly filled the air, mingling with the dust and the coppery tang of blood. Elara, amidst the chaos, loaded and fired, her movements clumsy but driven by a desperate, primal instinct. She aimed for the blue uniforms, for the faces that embodied the threat, her mind a blur of grim determination. She saw the soldiers fall, saw the Diné warriors fight with a fierce, unwavering courage, their movements fluid and deadly despite the overwhelming odds. Kaya was a force of nature, a towering figure amidst the chaos, his rifle spitting fire, his voice a commanding roar that rallied his men. He moved with a warrior's grace, cutting down his enemies, defending his people with every fiber of his being. He was fighting for his land, for his ancestors, for the sacred ways of his people. But he was also fighting for her, for the impossible love that had dared to bloom in the heart of this unforgiving world. She saw him briefly, across the smoke and the chaos, his eyes meeting hers, a silent exchange of love, of defiance, of an unyielding commitment that transcended the brutal reality of the battle. The Diné fought with a desperate ferocity, but the numbers were too great. The soldiers pushed forward, their ranks seemingly endless, their disciplined fire relentless. Warriors fell, their cries cut short, their bodies crumpling to the dust. The cries of the women and children from the central hogans rose in a panicked crescendo, a mournful wail that pierced the cacophony of battle. Despair, cold and insidious, began to creep into Elara's heart. They were being overwhelmed. The dream, The impossible love threatened to be extinguished in a tide of blood and sorrow. Suddenly, a massive explosion ripped through the air, closer this time, shaking the very ground beneath her. It was the soldiers, having set a charge, blowing a wider breach in the canyon wall, allowing more of their forces to flood in, effectively outflanking the remaining Diné resistance. The sound was deafening, followed by the terrible, rending cries of those caught in the blast. The battle shifted, irrevocably. The Diné were surrounded, their last desperate stand broken. Kaya, seeing the inevitable, made a desperate decision. He roared orders to his remaining warriors, sacrificing a few to hold the line, while he directed the women and children to a hidden escape route, a narrow, treacherous path through the rock, known only to a few. He moved with a frantic urgency, urging them forward, his face a mask of terrible anguish. He was choosing life, choosing to save his people, even if it meant sacrificing the fight. As he turned to Alara, his eyes blazing with a fierce, desperate love, a bullet ripped through the air, striking him in the shoulder. He staggered, a guttural cry escaping his lips, his hand clutching the wound. He fell to one knee, his face contorted in pain, his strength momentarily failing him. Ilara screamed, a raw, primal sound of terror and despair. She rushed to him, heedless of the gunfire, her small body shielding his, her hands trying to staunch the flow of blood. She looked up, her eyes blazing with hatred, at the soldier who had fired the shot, his face grim, his rifle already being reloaded. This was it, the culmination of their defiance, their impossible love, ending in the dust, just as it had begun. The rules, unyielding and cruel, were exacting their ultimate price. The immediate aftermath was a blur of searing pain and a desperate, primal instinct for survival. Ilara, her hands pressed futilely against Kaya's bleeding shoulder, heard the shouts of the soldiers, the renewed thunder of their boots as they surged forward, breaking through the last vestiges of Diné resistance. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic tang of blood, a suffocating shroud around them. She could feel the warmth of Kaya's blood on her fingers, the steady rhythmic pulse beneath her palm, a desperate beat that tethered her to him, to life. He was conscious, his eyes open, gazing up at her, a profound mix of pain and an unyielding tenderness in their depths. He tried to speak, a guttural sound escaping his lips, but no words formed. Just as the first soldier reached them, his face grim, his rifle raised, a shadow fell. Not the shadow of an enemy, but a swift, dark blur. It was Tall Bear, the elder who had so often opposed Ilara's presence, his face a mask of grim determination. He raised his rifle, not at the approaching soldier, but at the rock face above them, triggering a small rock slide. It was a desperate, delaying tactic, not meant to harm, but to create a momentary diversion, to buy precious seconds. The soldiers recoiled, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected cascade of stones and dust. "Go!" Tall Bear roared, his voice hoarse, his eyes fixed on Kaya and Ilara. "Go, Chief. Your people need you." His words, once laced with suspicion, were now a fierce command, a desperate plea. He was sacrificing his own safety, his own stand, to ensure his chief's survival, and by extension, the tenuous future of his people. Ilara, stunned, understood the immense weight of this act, the profound shift it represented. The ancient rules, the deep-seated prejudices, were momentarily suspended in the face of a greater need, the survival of their people, the preservation of their leader. Kaya, despite his wound, found a new surge of strength. He nodded at Tall Bear, a silent acknowledgement of the elder's sacrifice, a profound gratitude passing between them. Then, with a grunt of pain, he pushed himself up, leaning heavily on Ilara, his arm slung around her shoulder. "The path," he rasped, his voice weak but resolute. "Through the narrow passage, lead them." He was commanding her, trusting her, entrusting her with the lives of his people, with the future of their legacy. Ilara, overwhelmed by the responsibility, nodded fiercely. She looked at the remaining Diné warriors, their faces grim, their numbers dwindling, holding the line against the relentless advance of the soldiers. She saw the women and children struggling through the narrow escape route, urged on by the few uninjured warriors. This was not a moment for triumph, but for desperate, calculated survival. Supported by Ilara, Kaya began to move, his breath ragged, his body swaying with each step. They moved towards the hidden passage, their footsteps echoing the desperate urgency of their escape. The cries of battle, though fading, still reached them, a mournful lament for the lives lost, for the dreams shattered. Ilara guided him, her small body bracing his, her determination a fierce fire within her. She was not just leading him, she was leading the embodiment of their defiance, their forbidden love through the jaws of destruction. They made it to the hidden passage, a narrow, winding crevice in the rock face, barely wide enough for a single person. The Diné, the remnants of the band, were already scrambling through, their faces etched with fear and the raw agony of loss. Kaya, despite his wound, paused at the entrance, looking back at the battle, at the ground stained with the blood of his warriors, at the world that sought to consume them. His eyes held a profound sorrow, a silent farewell to those who had fallen, to the sacred land they were forced to abandon. As they began their slow, arduous descent into the passage, the echoes of the battle faded, replaced by the hushed sounds of breathing, the scraping of boots on rock, the quiet sobs of the children. The air in the passage was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the dust and heat of the conflict. Ilara felt a tremor run through her, a mixture of exhaustion and a fragile, nascent hope. They had survived. They were alive. But the cost was immense. The scars would run deep, and the future remained shrouded in uncertainty. They reached the bottom of the passage, emerging into a small, secluded grotto, hidden from the outside world. The remaining Diné gathered, their numbers few, their faces etched with the raw pain of loss, but also with a quiet, unyielding resolve. They were a broken people, but not defeated. Kaya, leaning heavily against the rock wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps, looked at his decimated band, then at Ilara. His eyes held hers, a silent, profound understanding passing between them. They had lost so much, but they had also gained something immeasurable, the undeniable truth of their connection, forged in the crucible of battle, tested by fire, and hardened by the relentless pursuit of a world that refused to accept them. The rules had been broken at a terrible cost, but their love, defiant and resilient, had found a way, however precarious, to endure. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril, but for the first time, a fragile seed of hope, born of shared sacrifice, began to unfurl its tender leaves in the desolate landscape of their future. The hidden grotto, though offering temporary respite, was not a sanctuary. The air still carried the faint, distant echoes of the battle, a haunting reminder of the violence they had just escaped. The small band of Diné, now numbering less than half of their original strength, huddled together, their faces etched with profound sorrow, and the dull ache of exhaustion. The women tended to the wounded, their movements quiet and efficient, their eyes holding a deep, ancient grief. The children, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, clung to their mothers, their usual playful energy replaced by a solemn quietude. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the soft murmurs of comfort and the ragged breaths of the injured. Kaya lay propped against a rock wall, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale and drawn. The wound, though not mortal, was deep, draining his strength. Ilara sat beside him, her hand gently brushing his forehead, her gaze fixed on his face, her heart aching with a fierce protective love. The price of their defiance, of their survival, was starkly evident in the pain etched on his features, in the visible depletion of his formidable strength. The world, unforgiving and relentless, had exacted its toll. Tall Bear, his face grim, approached them. He knelt beside Kaya, his eyes filled with a mixture of respect and a profound weariness. The soldiers, they did not pursue into the passage, he reported, his voice low. They will send scouts, but for now, we are safe. We will move at first light. He looked at Ilara, his gaze holding no trace of his former suspicion, only a quiet acknowledgement. You fought well, Tlesian. You saved our chief. You saved us. His words, simple and direct, were a profound testament to the shift in their perception of her, a testament to her courage and her unwavering loyalty. The rules of prejudice, though not erased, had been bent, perhaps even momentarily broken, by the undeniable truth of her actions. But the gratitude was tempered by the stark reality of their situation. The land they had fought for was lost, at least for now. Their home, their sacred place, had been defiled. They were refugees, a scattered remnant, forced to abandon their traditions, their very way of life, to survive. The irony was a bitter taste in Ilara's mouth. She had survived the massacre of her own people, only to witness the decimation of another. The cycle of violence, of loss, seemed unending. As the night wore on, and the cold deepened, Ilara watched Kaya sleep, his breathing shallow and uneven. She thought of his revelation, of his vow to protect, born of a past loss. Their love, their impossible connection, had been forged in the crucible of shared sorrow and defiant survival. It was not a love that promised ease or comfort, but one that demanded courage, resilience, and an unshakable commitment to each other, against all odds. It was a love that defied every rule, every expectation, every societal norm. A deep sense of responsibility settled over her, heavy but unwavering. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a guardian, a protector, bound to him and to his people by an invisible thread of shared destiny. The future was a vast, unknown landscape, shrouded in mist and peril. They would be pursued relentlessly. The white world would not forget their defiance, and there would be those within the Diné who would mourn their losses, and perhaps blame the outsider, the white woman who had dared to break the ancient rules. The path ahead would be fraught with constant struggle, with hunger and hardship, with the gnawing fear of discovery. But in the quiet solace of the grotto, as the stars wheeled slowly above them, Ilara found a fragile yet potent flicker of hope. It was not a hope for an easy life, for a peaceful resolution. It was a hope born of resilience, of an unyielding spirit that refused to be broken. They had faced the storm, and they had survived. They had lost much, but they had also gained something immeasurable, the profound, undeniable truth of their love, forged in the heart of conflict, hardened by adversity, and destined to challenge every rule, every boundary. Their story was not an ending, but a new beginning, written in the dust of the desert, whispered by the wind, and carried forward by the defiant hearts of two people who dared to love beyond all limits. The scars of the battle would remain, a permanent etching on their souls, but the spirit of their defiance, the flame of their impossible love, burned brighter than ever, illuminating a path, however narrow, into a future they would carve out for themselves, one defiant step at a time. This was their hard-won peace, a fragile tapestry woven with threads of sorrow and an unbreakable thread of hope. The desert, vast and indifferent, stretched before them, a canvas upon which their impossible future would be painted. The grotto was a temporary sanctuary, a fragile breath held between two storms. Days melted into weeks, marked by the slow, arduous process of healing and the unyielding rhythm of their new, nomadic existence. Kaya, though recovering, moved with a newfound caution, the weight of his wound a constant reminder of their narrow escape. His body, once so indomitable, now bore the visible mark of their defiance, a testament to the price of their forbidden love. Ilara, his constant shadow, his unwavering support, felt the profound responsibility of his recovery, of their very survival. She learned to forage with greater precision, to identify medicinal herbs, to anticipate his needs with an almost intuitive understanding. Their bond, forged in fire and adversity, had become an unspoken language, a profound connection that transcended the pain and the peril. The remnant of the Diné band, now a small, tightly knit family, moved with a desperate, quiet efficiency. They were ghosts in their own land, constantly seeking hidden paths, avoiding the white settlements, staying far from the established trails. The fear of discovery was a constant companion, a chill that never truly left their bones. The few remaining warriors, their faces etched with the memory of battle, maintained a relentless vigilance, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The whispers of old, though never fully silenced, had transformed. There was a quiet understanding now, a recognition of Ilara's place not as an outsider, but as an integral part of their survival, a crucial element in the chief's recovery. Tall Bear, in particular, remained a steadfast if grim presence, his initial disapproval replaced by a deep-seated respect for her courage and her unwavering loyalty to their chief. But the world outside continued to press in. Rumors carried by unseen currents reached them even in their remote hideaways. The soldiers, infuriated by their losses, had intensified their patrols. The colonel, a man consumed by vengeance, had sworn to hunt them down, to reclaim the white captive and exact retribution for the ambush. The bounty on Ilara's head had swelled to an unimaginable sum, making her a target, a symbol of defiance that simply could not be allowed to exist. The irony, sharp and bitter, was not lost on her. She was a prize to be taken, not a person to be understood. Their love, a beacon of hope in the darkness, was also a relentless magnet for danger. One evening, as Kaya slowly regained his strength, they sat by a meager fire, the vast expanse of the desert stretching around them, silent and watchful. He looked at her, his dark eyes holding a deep, profound tenderness and a quiet, ancient sorrow. "The path ahead, it holds no ease, Tlesian," he murmured, his voice still a little weak, but imbued with his characteristic resonance. "We are between worlds, not truly part of the white man's way, not fully accepted by all of our own. We walk a lonely path." He spoke of the enduring struggle, the relentless pursuit, the knowledge that true peace, as others knew it, would likely forever elude them. Their love, born of a challenge, would forever be defined by that challenge. Ilara reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, a silent promise. "Then we walk it together, Kaya," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "We make our own rules, our own world, between the cracks." She had come to understand that their love was not a weakness, but a profound strength, a defiance against a world that sought to categorize, to divide, to control. It was a testament to the human spirit's unyielding need for connection, for belonging, even in the most impossible circumstances. Their story would not be one of grand victories or peaceful integration, but of quiet endurance, of fierce loyalty, of an unyielding spirit that refused to bow. Their future was not a place of comfort and security, but a constant journey, a perpetual state of vigilance. They would teach their children, should they be blessed with them, not only the ancient ways of the Diné, but also the lessons of survival in a changing world, the bitter truths of both cultures, the wisdom of adapting while holding fast to what truly mattered. Their love would be a legacy, a living story whispered around campfires, a testament to the power of human connection that transcended all boundaries, all rules, all societal expectations. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a final defiant flourish of orange and purple. The stars began to emerge, cold and brilliant, ancient witnesses to countless stories of love and loss. Ilara looked at Kaya, at the man who had saved her, who had dared to love her, who had broken every rule for her. In his eyes she saw not despair, but a quiet, enduring hope, a profound acceptance of their chosen path. They were two souls, adrift between worlds, bound by a love that was as vast and unyielding as the desert itself. Their story was far from over. It was a perpetual journey into the heart of defiance, a living testament to the truth that some fires, once lit, burn forever, illuminating a path through the darkest of nights. Their love, forged in the crucible of conflict, would be their guide, a quiet, defiant light in a world that demanded conformity. It was a resolution not of ending, but of enduring, a hopeful promise etched into the very dust of the land, a defiant echo against the winds of time.